I've been staring at budgeting apps for way too long, and I have a confession. I'm more confused now than when I started. There are categories for everything, subcategories for the subcategories, pie charts that look like abstract art, and enough notification settings to run a small corporation. So I started wondering, what actually is a budget? Like, really? Because I'm pretty sure our grandparents weren't color coding their grocery expenses into 17 different categories, and they seem to manage their money just fine. Let's figure this out together because I think we've all been overthinking this whole budgeting thing. By the end of this video, we're going to understand what a budget actually is, why it works, and why every app seems determined to make it way more complicated than it needs to be. I'm not a financial expert. I'm just someone who got tired of feeling confused by something that should probably be pretty straightforward. So let's start from scratch and see what we can learn together. Here's what I think happened. Somewhere along the way, budgeting got turned into this elaborate system with rules and categories and tracking every single penny. But when you strip all that away, a number budget narrator is actually just answering one simple question. Where is my money going? And am I okay with that? That's it. It's not about perfection or tracking every coffee purchase or having the prettiest spreadsheet. It's about awareness and intention such. Think about it this way. If someone asked you right now where your money went last month, could you give them a reasonably accurate answer? Not down to the penny, but the big picture. If you can't, that's not a character flaw or a sign that you're bad with money. It just means you don't have a clear picture of your urge for tomorrow's money flow suckers, which is totally normal and completely fixable. A budget is basically a map of your money. It shows you where your money comes from and where it goes. Just like a map of your neighborhood shows you the streets and landmarks, a budget shows you your financial landscape. You wouldn't try to navigate a new city without some kind of map or GPS, right? Same principle applies to your money. Now here's where I think things got complicated. At some point, someone decided that budgeting had to be this precise, categorized, color-coded system. You've probably seen those budget templates with categories like transportation, entertainment, personal care, miscellaneous, and about 15 others. And look, if that level of detail works for you, great. But for most of us, it's like trying to organize our sock drawer by thread count. Technically possible, but probably unnecessary. The truth is, most people only need to understand a few big buckets of spending. There's the must-pay stuff, water rights, rent, utilities, minimum debt payments, groceries. There's the want-to-pay stuff, entertainment, hobbies, eating out. And there's the future stuff, savings, extra debt payments, investments. That's really it. 3 buckets. Everything else is just subcategories that might or might not be helpful depending on your situation. But here's what I've noticed about budgeting apps and systems. They seem to assume that more categories equals better budgeting. It's like they think if you can track your spending in enough detail, you'll magically become better with money. But that's kind of like saying if you count every step you take, you'll automatically become more fit. The counting itself doesn't create the change. The awareness and the action that follows do. Let me share what I think actually makes budgeting work, and it's surprisingly simple. First, you need to know how much money comes in. This part is usually pretty straightforward. It's your paycheck, any side income, whatever money you have coming in regularly. Write that number down. Second, you need to know how much money goes out and where it's going. This is where most people get stuck, and it's where all those apps want to jump in with their 47 categories. But here's a simpler approach. Look at your last month or two of spending and group things into those 3 buckets I mentioned. Must pay, want to pay, and future. Don't worry about being perfect or catching every transaction. You're looking for patterns, not precision. Third, and this is the part that actually makes it a just budget instead of just a spending report, you decide if you're okay with those patterns. Are you spending way more on wants than you realized? Are you not putting anything toward the future? Are you actually doing better than you thought? This is where the intention on our part comes in. A budget isn't just tracking, it's deciding. Here's something that took me a while to understand. A budget doesn't have to be restrictive. I think a lot of people avoid budgeting because they think it means saying no to everything fun. But really, a good budget can actually give you more freedom to spend on things you care about because you're being intentional about it. It's like the difference between wandering around a grocery store hungry and going in with a loose plan. The plan doesn't ruin the experience. It just helps you make better decisions and probably feel better about what you end up with. Now, let's talk about why budgeting apps make this so complicated. I think there are a few reasons. First, complexity sells. A simple app that just shows you 3 buckets of spending doesn't look as impressive as one with charts and graphs and detailed categorization. It's like how some websites have tons of features you'll never use. Sometimes more feels like better value, even when it's not. Second, I think there's this assumption that if budgeting isn't working for someone, they must need more features, not fewer. Can't stick to your budget? Try our new goal-setting feature, still struggling? How about automated alerts every time you spend money? But for most people, the problem isn't lack of features, it's that the whole system feels overwhelming and disconnected from real life. Third, and this might be the biggest one, I think we've gotten confused about what makes budgeting successful. It's not about perfect tracking or never overspending in a category. It's about developing awareness of your money patterns and making intentional decisions about changes you want to make. But awareness and intention are harder to put into an app than categories and notifications. Here's what I've learned about what actually makes budgeting work in real life. It has to be simple enough that you'll actually do it. If your budgeting system takes more than a few minutes to maintain each week, you probably won't stick with it long term, and consistency beats perfection every time. It has to be flexible enough to work with your actual life. Your spending isn't going to be exactly the same every month, and that's normal. A good budget bends without breaking when life happens. It has to focus on the big picture, not every tiny detail. The goal isn't to account for every dollar, it's to make sure your overall money flow is working for you and your goals. And probably most importantly, it has to help you make decisions, not just track what already happened. The real value of budgeting comes from the awareness and intention it creates, not from the tracking itself. So what does a simple, actually useful budget look like? It starts with knowing your number, all your income, how much money you have coming in each month. Then it looks at your fixed expenses, the stuff you have to pay no matter what. Rent, insurance, minimum debt payments, basic groceries. These are your non-negotiables. Next, it considers your financial goals. Are you trying to build an emergency fund, pay off debt, save for something specific? This is your future bucket. And ideally, some money goes here every month, even if it's not much. Finally, it accounts for everything else, the flexible spending on things you want but don't absolutely need. This includes entertainment, eating out, hobbies, shopping, all that stuff. The key insight is that this last category is where you have the most control and where small changes can make the biggest difference. Here's the thing about budgeting that I wish someone had told me earlier. It's not about getting it perfect from day one. It's about building awareness over time and making small adjustments as you learn more about your patterns. Your first budget will probably be wrong in some ways, and that's completely fine. Think of it as a starting point, not a final answer. The real magic happens when you start noticing things, like realizing you spend way more on convenience food than you thought, or discovering that you're actually pretty good at avoiding impulse purchases, or seeing that your money stress is mostly about not having a clear picture rather than not having enough money. These insights only come from paying attention, and a budget is just a tool that helps you pay attention in a structured way. One more thing about budgeting apps and why they overcomplicate things. I think they're trying to solve the wrong problem. They focus on tracking and categorizing. But the real challenge most people have with money isn't lack of information. It's lack of clarity about what they want their money to do for them. No app can tell you whether you should spend more on experiences or save more for the future. No category system can decide whether that subscription is worth it to you. These are personal decisions that require reflection and intention, not better tracking. The best budgeting system is probably the one you'll actually use consistently, and for most people, that means keeping it simple. Maybe it's just checking in with your 3 spending buckets once a week. Maybe it's a basic spreadsheet with your income, fixed costs, and savings goals. Maybe it's even just a notebook where you jot down your big expenses and check in with yourself about whether you're happy with your spending patterns. The tool matters way less than the habit of paying attention and making intentional decisions. Here's what I think we should remember about budgeting. It's not about restriction or perfection or having the most sophisticated system. It's about awareness, juice, and sattar intention or yours. It's about knowing where your money goes and being okay with those choices. It's about making sure your spending aligns with what you actually care about, not what you think you should care about. And honestly, once you strip away all the complicated categories and tracking systems, budgeting becomes a lot less intimidating. It's just paying attention to your money and making decisions about it. That's something all of us can do, regardless of how much money we have or how organized we are in other areas of life. So if you've been avoiding budgeting because it seems too complicated, or if you've tried budgeting apps and felt overwhelmed, maybe try starting simpler. Look at where your money went last month. Group it into must pay, want to pay, and future. Ask yourself if you're okay with those patterns. If not, think about what you'd like to change. That's budgeting. Everything else is just extra features that may or may not be helpful for your specific situation. The goal isn't to become a budgeting expert or to have the perfect system. The goal is to feel more intentional and aware about your money decisions. And that's something you can start working on today with or without an app, with or without perfect categories, with or without tracking every single expense. Because at the end of the day, a budget is just a tool to help you be more intentional with your money. And being intentional doesn't require complexity. It just requires paying attention and making decisions. That's something all of us can do.